Amnesia is a pretty common trait among many pop culture protagonists. The lack of a memory allows even the strongest of characters to be challenged by weaker antagonists, but leaves room for them to ascend to higher levels in later parts of the story. The Rover from Wuthering Waves is not immune to this trope. For most of the 1.0 story, we don't really know where they come from, but they clearly radiated big protagonist energy with abilities to just outright absorb the bad guys. Their true identity remained a mystery for all of a couple of weeks, and in the 1.1 main story, we actually learned that the Rover is likely someone of great importance. Someone that even the Sentinels, the strongest beings seen in the game so far, bend the knee to, because in truth, the Rover is actually the Lord Arbiter themselves. But what does that even mean? That's what we'll be discussing in this video, the recent reveal of Rover's somewhat true identity. Before we discuss that though, if you want to see more Wuthering Waves content, do consider subscribing to the channel. The main story for the 1.1 patch of Wuthering Waves has been out for a little over a week. But just in case there are some of you who are still playing through that, fair warning, there will be spoilers in this video. So if you haven't cleared it yet, you might want to jump off for now and come back a little bit later. If you don't care about spoilers, then let's continue. Let's first start off with what actually happened in 1.1. At the start of this story, the Rover is accompanied by Jin Shi's teacher Chang Li as they search for Jin Shi, who has gone to Mount Firmament in search of the sentinel Jue. When they arrive, they find out that the situation seems to be far more complicated than they initially expected. Throughout their search for the sentinel, they come across information that indicated that Jue was injured in the past, and because of this, has lost control over its ability to manipulate time. If this situation was left unremedied, most of Jinzhou would get caught up in a catastrophic timey-wimey event, placing all of its inhabitants in relative danger. When the Rover and Jin Shi eventually find the sentinel, it all but confirms this. This is when we hear Jue refer to the Rover as the Lord Arbiter, and it cannot figure out why they have appeared at this time. Jue mentions that regardless of the reason behind the Rover's sudden appearance, it undoubtedly marks a significant juncture in Jinzhou's fate. When the Rover requests for an explanation, Jue explains that in due time one will be provided. But for now, they had to fulfill their role to engage, decide, and observe, which likely means it wants the Rover to observe the events that are about to transpire. It's a bit cryptic at this point, but just bear with me and I'll explain all of this later in the video. Going back to the problem at hand, Jue's solution to its time powers going wonky was to use the last bit of power it has left to essentially freeze time throughout the entirety of the region, so that in the future, someone with the means and technology might be able to help them. Jin Shi disagrees with this, as there is no assurance anyone would ever help them even in the future, and wants to pursue an alternative path. One that involves transferring Jue's powers to herself so that she may rectify the situation in the Sentinel's place. They go back and forth on this like a dragon mom arguing with her teenage daughter who wants to go out on her first date, but this is when the Rover steps in and asks whether there was another way or if they could help even the odds. To which Jue responds that the Rover is only there to witness these events before the right time arrives. More cryptic stuff. However, despite Jue's rather stern response, it then mentions that if they so choose, the Rover can intervene. You see, the crux of this problem and why Jue disagrees with Jin Shi's plan is, in order for the transfer to be successful, Jin Shi must duel the time-controlling dragon, and at the moment in which her resonance powers deplete, the transfer must take place. A second too soon or too late, and Jin Shi suffers an agonizing death, becoming merely a husk. On top of that, the fight would leave Jue bereft of whatever strength it has left, and thus would prevent it from freezing time, leading to Jinzhou's ultimate demise. This is where the Rover comes in. At the right moment, the Rover must command the Sentinel to transfer its powers over to Jin Shi. The way this is said, and even later when it's repeated, implies that the Rover has authority over the Sentinel. Once the Rover agrees, Jue then proceeds to set the final stage for their duel by conjuring a sonorosphere. This is when it gets extremely interesting. You see, Jue mentions that given how all this has transpired, they are largely curious about the Arbiter's choice this time. It specifically says this time, heavily implying that this isn't the first time this choice has had to be made. The sentinel then goes on to say that regardless of the outcome of the fight, the rover will bear witness to it for better or worse, and for a brief moment, I'm pretty sure we see a glimpse of what happens if they fail, perhaps something that happened in a previous cycle or loop. This really makes me think that something similar to this very event has occurred before, but perhaps the rover chose differently at that time. Now before the battle starts in earnest, Jue says one last thing. Only the rover may decide whether or not to open the way to the field of battle. Sure, Jinshi and Jue are the ones having the duel, but in the Sentinel's own words, the key to Jinzo's future lies in the rover's hands. This means that only the rover can decide whether or not this is the best path, and if they can place their trust on Jinshi. Now, of course, Jinshi ends up defeating Jue, gaining her second awakening and saving Jinzo, but everything thus far, I think, sort of gives us an idea of who or what the rover actually is. And this goes back to the point of the whole video. What exactly does the title of Arbiter mean? By definition, an arbiter is someone appointed to witness or judge a particular event or dispute. Based on this, and with what we have seen, I think that the rover may be someone who is judging or witnessing the progression of humanity itself. They are here to decide whether humanity is ready to ascend to a higher level of evolution. Take the events of the 1.1 story for example. Since the beginning of Wuthering Waves' story, most of the resonators we meet have unique abilities, but none of them could stand against the sentinels in terms of pure power. By the conclusion of the 1.1 story, however, Jinshi not only inherits the time flow abilities of Jue, but can now adequately wield it. This sequence of events might be a snapshot of the rover's main overarching goal, or the purpose for their appearance in this particular story. They are here to witness humanity's resolve and decide whether they are ready to take the next step, much like how they had to decide whether or not to allow Jinshi to face Jue. Jue even outright confirms this, as in the past, the rover had mentioned to the sentinel that they wish to participate in history, to make choices, and witness the development of civilizations. And again, I think this is to determine and witness firsthand how ready humanity really is. The sentinel also reveals that they had previously requested for permission to transfer their abilities to Jinshi, and it's very likely that when that request was made, the arbiter initially rejected it. This might explain why Jue was interested in the rover's decision this time, as in the past they likely did not allow it. The arbiter or rover likely knew that at that point, Jinshi was not yet ready, and by Jue's own admission, informing Jinshi about how things might play out would have ultimately resulted in her failure. She needed to develop both strength and confidence to undertake this challenge, otherwise it wouldn't have worked. This is likely what the rover's role as the arbiter really is. They are meant to determine if humanity is ready to take on the mantle of leadership and assume the positions that the sentinels have thus far been occupying. If they deem humanity ready, then they would allow the sentinels to transfer their mandates accordingly, much like with Jue and Jinshi. Now, this is where I'm gonna go completely off the rails. While it's somewhat clear that the role of the arbiter is to act as a gatekeeper to these trials, I have a feeling that there is more to this than we initially assumed. I think that all these tests and challenges have actually been purposefully and meticulously planned by the rover, or perhaps someone they work with. Since the sentinels themselves are subject to the arbiter's approval and the rover was even confirmed to have established Jinzo itself, I think everything else was set up by them as well. The rover was likely responsible for the formation of the Black Shores, the evolution of humanity in becoming resonators, and even the knowledge and technology passed down to the Court of Savante. Everything was planned and put in place by the rover, and they are now just waiting for humanity to rise up to the challenge. I mean, think about it. All the research done in the past by the Court of Savante just so happens to be the solution Jinshi needs to save everyone in the present. So it's pretty clear that the rover likely wants humanity to be the shepherds of their own destiny and has placed all these things in place to ensure they have a better chance at succeeding. Now, why they are doing this is anyone's guess. Maybe they are preparing or teaching humanity on how to survive the lament, or perhaps there is some future enemy that they need to be prepared for. Their motives for helping humanity remain largely a mystery, but their role as arbiter of humanity's evolution does indeed seem plausible. To add to their rather mysterious motives, even with what we've learned, I still have this feeling that the rover hails from the future. Were they in the past? Yes, definitely. That's all but proven. But with what Dewey says about the rover wanting to be involved in history and the words of the researcher from the Court of Savante, it just seems that they come from a different timeline altogether. In fact, with what we know now and the researcher's exposition, it might even give us a potential reason for their involvement with humanity's progression. The researcher referred to a future being hailing from our past and even urges this mysterious individual to continue forward into the future until the right gate is found. I have this suspicion that perhaps humanity requested help or something from the hologram lady, the one we see with Rover in the opening cutscene, and from then on, the rover was sent to help humanity by setting all these things up and ensuring that they are ready for it. The timeline is a little confusing for this to work, but it's just this nagging feeling that this is really what is happening and that the opening cutscene might even be an alternate dimension or future or something. Now, even if this last bit doesn't turn out to be true, I still think that the rover's true purpose is indeed to prepare humanity and uplift them. They are here to not only lay the groundwork for humanity's ascension, but to also witness whether they are ready. That's why, despite the rover being the one to open the sonorosphere to Jue's fight, they were not the ones who had to fight them. Jin Shi was. Maybe this has always been the plan, for humanity to become resonators and eventually achieve their second awakening through absorbing the powers of the sentinels. I mean, given each city has its own sentinel, if everything works out, humanity is well prepared to defend itself. The rover would watch them silently, and when humanity has reached a point where it can progress, they would make themselves known and enable the sentinels to carry out their true purpose. The only thing I can't be sure of is what exactly the rover is preparing them for, but that's likely a discussion for another time. With that, I'll bring the video to an end. I really enjoyed theorizing this particular story, and admittedly, there are parts that are rather weird, but I am looking forward to learn more about who the rover actually is and why they are going through all this trouble. Why do you think the rover is truly helping humanity? Is it because they are just benevolent, or do they have an ulterior motive? Let me know what you think in the comments. If you found the video entertaining, do consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Thanks so much for watching, and as usual, have a nice day.